And welcome back to this episode of Silicon Wafers News Summaries. The war is moving off the front lines and into the energy grids, refineries, and logistics. We are entering the strategic logic of the winter war. And this may be the winter that breaks the Russian army. Before we jump in, thank you to everyone who supports the channel through Patreon and buy me a coffee. All your support in helping to develop this new channel and to add the comments, etc., share and like is of tremendous assistance, and I'm exceedingly grateful to everybody. Now let's jump into the story. Over the last 48 hours, Ukraine has struck deep inside Russia, a thermal power substation in Belgorod, a missile strike on a Bryansk electronics plant, and on a different front, small unmanned systems have taken down a heavy Russian helicopter. These are not isolated incidents. There is a pattern that unites these stories. It's a story of Ukrainian innovation, daring and ingenuity, and the indomitable will to achieve victory and justice. We'll explain what happened, why it matters, and what it tells us about how the war will be fought this winter. Let's start with Belgorod and a thermal power substation that's been hit. On September 28th to 29th, 2025, reports from Russian authorities and Russian language telegram channels described strikes that damaged electrical infrastructure in the Belgorod Oblast and caused widespread outages across the region. Belgorod's governor, Vyacheslav Gladkov, confirmed the damage and spoke of power disruption. That's from the Kyiv Independent. Here is his exact quote. "There were significant power outages," he said on September 28th, and various videos have surfaced showing the moment that the lights went out in Belgorod. The formal reporting indicates a substation or associated switchgear was hit, not only a boiler or a single generator. A substation strike can cause cascades through the network, disconnecting large segments of distribution, overload neighboring transformers, and cause rolling blackouts. They are expensive and slow to repair because high voltage transformers and switchgears are custom, heavy, and sometimes they must be trucked in from distant factories. That's according to the experts in the Kyiv Independent. Apart from stripping down other plants for spare parts, it's also likely that Russia does not have the capacity to manufacture the required parts and equipment from scratch. It's unlikely as well that China will be able to just provide these custom parts at the drop of a hat. Hitting an electrical node in Belgorod serves two aims for Ukraine. It imposes immediate civilian and logistical pain on the rear areas that support Russia's frontline operations, and it forces Moscow to relocate air defense and repair resources away from their offensive operations. If the effect persists, the pressure in those regions grows, panic buying of fuel and food, and calls for more local protection. And of course, we are already seeing fuel shortages. We are already seeing queues outside various petrol stations across Russia, some of which are closed when they run out. Reuters coverage and local reporting confirmed outages and the strain on emergency services. There are, of course, strategic implications too. Striking a power substation crosses a threshold for the Kremlin. Energy systems are dual use. They power civilian life, industry, and military logistics. Damaging them signals that Ukraine's target set is broadening beyond oil depots and weapon factories to the electrical arteries that keep Russia's rear functioning. That's according to the Kyiv Independent. But this cannot be called an escalation, as some in the media have been labelling it, because Moscow has been striking Ukrainian civilian power plants since the first winter of this war. This is now the fourth winter. The difference now is that Ukraine has the capacity to strike back, and allies are no longer pressuring it to stop. Everyone has grown tired of Putin's relentless, single-minded, and pointless aggression. The Winter War, why energy facilities are the centerpiece. The International Energy Agency, Reuters, and a raft of financial press have warned that both sides, Russia and Ukraine, have increasingly focused attacks on energy systems, refineries, gas compressors, stations, substations, etc., precisely because winter raises the stakes. The IEA and ground reporting say that Ukraine's grid has been fragile since the spring, and Russia's oil refining sector has already taken significant damage this year. But those that criticize Ukraine or insist that it follows international law about not striking power plants must realize that this is now about survival and deterrence. Ukraine is showing that Russia's actions have costs and are doing it in a way that no Western sanctions to date have succeeded in doing. Financial and market indicators confirm this is not symbolic. The Financial Times reported that Ukraine's strikes in recent weeks have hit many of Russia's refineries, cutting refining capacity and pushing diesel export economics towards a crisis. Reuters and other outlets report fuel shortages and rationing in parts of Russia. Why energy is at the centre of this? Well, electricity and refined fuels are force multipliers. Without grid power, heating, hospitals, rail logistics, and munitions production slow or stop entirely. Without diesel, armoured movement, generators at substations, and frontline supply convoys are constrained. Hence, the calculus this winter looks like this. Remove the opponent's logistics and mobility, and you lift the intensity of the fighting and dramatically weaken Moscow's rabble army. And from a technical standpoint, energy systems have a few shared vulnerabilities. Centralized high-voltage nodes, transformer farms and major substations, pipeline compressor stations and pumping stations, large fuel depots and port terminals. These targets are relatively few, but they are critically hard to repair quickly because some equipment, large power transformers, special turbines, take many months to manufacture, deliver, and install, even if Russia had the capacity to replace them, which is highly doubtful. That also makes them very difficult to defend and also creates an asymmetry that makes them into highly efficient strategic targets. Now let's turn to the next strike, and that is on Bryansk, the Elektrodetal factory strike. This is an industrial supply chain hit and quite a significant one by the forces of Ukraine against the aggressor. On September 29th, 2025, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirmed a missile strike on the Elektrodetal plant in Karachev, Bryansk Oblast, a plant that manufactures electrical connectors and parts used in military systems. The General Staff noted that the strike used long-range missiles and that the distance exceeded 240 kilometers. That's according to Pravda. The exact quote from the General Staff and reported by Ukrainska Pravda is, as part of efforts to degrade the combat capabilities of the occupying forces, on 29th September, rocket forces and artillery units of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in coordination with other components of the defense forces, launched 4 missiles against the Karachev Elektrodetal plant. Russia, the flight distance exceeded 240 kilometers. Why this matters? Well, Elektrodetal is not a civilian-only factory. It produces components used across electronics and military systems, connectors for antennas, avionics, communications, and more. Disrupting such a factory degrades Russia's ability to produce or repair systems at scale. Strike a small to medium vendor in the supply chain, and you cause downstream production delays across many platforms. The missiles reportedly flew greater than 240 kilometers in distance. That range is consistent with Ukraine using long-range tactical missiles, Neptune variants or long-range ATACMS analogues, or precision rocket artillery like HIMARS variants with extended ranges. Long-range maritime and deep ground strikes are easier now because Ukraine has improved its ISR, that is intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, satellite queuing and better target nomination from various networks, partisan networks included, and recon drones. A factory like Elektrodetal is a high-value, high-leverage target. It yields strategic impact disproportionate to the cost of the missile and the mission. That's according to Pravda. These strikes put pressure on Moscow's industrial base and complicate the repair cycles. They also changed the narrative. This is no longer just frontline attrition. This is a campaign to hamper Russian replenishment and the systems that sustain its military. That matters when we think about long winters of attrition and the political economy of war finance. Again, that's from Ukrainska Pravda. This is also about Trump's change of tone recently, causing him to utter the phrase that Ukraine can win. It's strikes like these that are changing the way the conflict is viewed by those that previously doubted the capacity of Ukraine to even survive, let alone triumph against the larger foe. Now we turn to the last story of the episode, and that is the FPV drone that has destroyed an Mi-28N. And this again demonstrates an extraordinary economy of scale in the ability to take out enemy platforms. On September 29th, 2025, Ukrainian Unmanned Systems forces reported that operators from the 59th Brigade struck and destroyed a Russian Mi-28N attack helicopter near Kotyarivka in Donetsk Oblast. The brigade released imagery and a terse statement to the public. That was reported in the Kyiv Independent, and it is an incredible sight to see this piece of Russian kit being taken out. Again, there are some extraordinary videos online that you can see. Here is the exact quote of the 59th Brigade, re-reported by the Kyiv Independent. "Whoever flies there for a look, be prepared," the brigade statement read. "For the future, do not give us any surprises from the air. It will cost you dearly." Reporting repeatedly highlights the stark cost ratio. Modern FPV kamikaze drones used in Ukraine are produced at a very low unit cost, commonly reported in the hundreds to low thousands of dollars per unit, while an attack helicopter like the Mi-28N is typically valued in the high single-digit to low double-digit millions of dollars. Estimates often put it at around $12 to $18 million, depending on configuration and obsolescence. That makes the battlefield economics brutally simple. A few hundred to a few $1,000s of drone can destroy an asset worth many, many millions. Sources report that FPV units cost from roughly $300 to $2,000 on average, and the Mi-28 valuations from 12 to 80 million, which makes this an extraordinarily successful operation. How the strike works technically, though, well, an FPV kamikaze works by providing a video feed to a ground operator who manually guides the drone in on target, or uses a hybrid manual autonomous terminal. Again, helicopters on approach or in hover, they have a large, relatively slow target profile and vulnerable components, rotors, engines, transmissions, and weapons pylons. An FPV with a shaped explosive or modified warhead can cause catastrophic damage to rotating systems or fuel lines, forcing a shootdown or a crash. That is as described in the Kyiv Independent. If helicopters, key close air support and anti-armor assets are vulnerable to cheap UAS, commanders must change tactics, fly higher, reducing their effectiveness, add escorts, that is very resource intensive, or run limited sorties. Each change multiplies the cost of a mission for Moscow and makes its own front lines more vulnerable. The lived effect is that a cheap drone campaign can force expensive operational adaptations or reduce effectiveness of high-value platforms, and overall they attrit the capability of the wider Russian army. Well, what this pattern means for escalation, the winter policy, and the Allied response. Winter has changed the target set. Energy and logistics are now primary strategic nodes. Belgorod shows that Ukraine is ready to strike electrical distribution as well as oil. Expect more targeting of compressor stations, substations, and export terminals. That's in the Kyiv Independent. The economics of warfare favour the defender in much greater proportions now than at any time historically. Drones and precision missiles, relatively cheap compared to the value they can destroy, change the defender's calculus. A few thousands of dollars now can neutralize an aircraft or force a shutdown of refineries that undercut export revenue. Collectively, cumulatively, that can amount to billions of dollars. That is a significantly asymmetric attritional advantage, and the balance is moving decidedly in Ukraine's favor. Ukraine is, of course, also at risk from the winter campaign, and it's now up to allies to accelerate their support for Ukraine at this pivotal point in the war, accelerate air defense deliveries, Patriot, SAMP-T, etc., scale maritime interdiction and sanctions on Russia's shadow tanker fleet to deny revenue for logistics and strengthen the protections for critical energy nodes. That includes physical protections, mobile redundancy, and repair support. Each intervention, of course, has cost implications for the Allies, but altogether, taken together, they reduce the impact of Russia's attacks. That's suggested by the Financial Times. Let's not forget how resilient Ukraine has become at building distributed energy grids and rapidly repairing damage when it is inflicted. Ukraine's Unmanned Systems forces, the very units that struck the Mi-28N, have institutionalized these cheap, high-impact tactics. That learning curve is now exported into the battlefield logic of both sides, but they do favor the defender over the attacker. The old metric of hardware counts is no longer sufficient to measure operational strength, given these extraordinary ratios of efficiency in taking out costly platforms using cheaper, much cheaper munitions like drones. This winter, we are not watching a frozen conflict. We are watching a redistribution of battlefield advantage and a shift in the war of logistics and attrition. Ukraine is using precision and asymmetry, missiles to disrupt supply chains, drones to change the battlefield math. The results are highly asymmetric. A handful of missiles or drones can force Moscow to retreat and can force upon the Kremlin severe problems in maintaining its war machine. We can bet as well that Moscow will not be as agile in repairing the damage to its electricity network if Ukraine's attacks continue along that path. And this puts the entire Putin regime under strain and strips away its aura of invulnerability. Slava Ukraini.
Бажаємо міцного здоров'я. Ми бійці батальйону безпілотних систем Black Raven 93-ї бригади Холодний Яр виконуємо бойове завдання на Константинівському напрямку в Донецькій області. Для їх успішного виконання наш підрозділ має потребу в пікапах для виїзду особового складу на позиції, евакуації, своєчасного підвозу боєприпасів, дронів та обладнання в район ведення бойових дій. Звертаємося до YouTube-спільноти Silicon Curtain та Джонатана особисто з проханням допомогти підтримати збір, а також до Car for Ukraine та Бандера Мобіль з проханням допомогти з купівлею, підготовкою та доставкою авто на фронт. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!